What if the safest person in the room was actually the most dangerous? Not a stranger, not someone hiding in the shadows, a caregiver, a professional, someone patients trusted with their lives. The mystery isn't simply how these deaths went unnoticed. The real mystery is far more unsettling. What kind of mind can look a vulnerable patient in the eye and calmly decide whether they live or die? Today we open the case file on a killer who didn't operate under the cover of darkness. They operated beneath fluorescent lights, protected by the one thing no one thought to question: trust. Let's open the case file. Behavioral evidence number 1. The pattern. Every investigation begins with a clue. This one began with a pattern. Patients weren't suddenly collapsing in obvious ways. Instead, they were quiet, unexplained deteriorations that seemed to occur more often when one particular caregiver was on duty. Not enough to immediately accuse anyone, just enough to leave experienced staff with an uncomfortable feeling they couldn't explain. So why didn't anyone act sooner? Because hospitals depend on trust. Every uniform, every credential, every routine tells our brains the same thing: you're safe here. When that belief becomes automatic, suspicion becomes difficult. As investigators later discovered, the greatest camouflage wasn't secrecy, it was belonging. If you're fascinated by criminal psychology and behavioral investigations, subscribe and ring the evidence bell so you don't miss the next case. Now, let's follow the evidence. Behavioral evidence number 2, the mask. One of the clearest examples of this pattern is Charles Cullen. For 16 years, Cullen worked as a registered nurse at hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Unexplained patient deaths followed him from one hospital to the next. Concerns were raised more than once, yet he repeatedly moved on before anyone connected the dots. Investigators eventually realized they weren't looking at isolated incidents. They were looking at a pattern. Psychologists have long described the concept often referred to as the mask of sanity, a person who appears calm, capable, and trustworthy, while concealing a profoundly different inner world. The unsettling part isn't that every act of kindness is fake, it's that the public persona and the private psychology can exist side by side. A caregiver can comfort grieving families, earn the trust of coworkers, and still believe they have the right to decide who lives and who dies. The mask isn't built on deception alone, it's built on everyone else's willingness to trust it. The investigation deepens. Once investigators began looking beyond a single hospital, a much larger picture started to emerge. Charles Cullen wasn't connected to just one suspicious death. Over a 16-year career, he worked at multiple hospitals, and wherever he went, questions eventually followed. Co-workers noticed unexplained patient declines. Concerns were quietly raised, but without clear proof of a crime, each incident was treated as an isolated problem. Looking back, that's one of the most revealing parts of this case. No single hospital could see the entire pattern. Only when investigators compared records across multiple facilities did they realize they weren't looking at separate incidents. They were looking at the same behavioral fingerprint repeating itself. Human nature played a role as well. Our brains instinctively search for the simplest explanation: a medication error, an unusually sick patient, or a tragic coincidence. It's far easier to believe those possibilities than to imagine a trusted caregiver intentionally causing harm. That psychological blind spot gave Cullen something every serial offender needs: opportunity. As long as each hospital believed it was dealing with a unique incident, the larger pattern remained hidden. The breakthrough finally came when investigators uncovered medication irregularities that repeatedly pointed back to Cullen. Combined with witness interviews and hospital records, those seemingly unrelated clues began fitting together. That's how most major investigations are solved. Not through one dramatic discovery, but through dozens of small pieces of evidence that finally reveal the truth. And once that picture came into focus, the investigation shifted. The question was no longer what Charles Cullen had done. It became why he believed he had the right to do it. Behavioral evidence number 3, control. The deeper investigators looked, and the clearer the motive became. This wasn't simply about killing. It was about control. Control over life, control over death, control over making a decision no one else believed they had the right to make. According to Cullen's own later statements, he sometimes believed he was ending suffering. Whether or not that reflected reality, it revealed something important about his psychology. He created a private moral framework. The patient's wishes didn't matter. The family's wishes didn't matter. Only his own judgment. Psychologists call this compartmentalization. In healthy people, it helps doctors, nurses, and first responders function under pressure. In the wrong mind, it separates conscience from action. Empathy becomes quieter. Justification becomes louder. The decision becomes easier. That's why the crime didn't begin with a syringe. It began with a pattern of thinking that slowly replaced compassion with control. As we close this case file, it's tempting to believe stories like this belong to another world. But that's not what the evidence tells us. The evidence tells us that trust is one of humanity's greatest strengths, and it's also one of its greatest vulnerabilities. The overwhelming majority of healthcare professionals dedicate their lives to saving others. That's exactly why the rare individual who betrays that trust can remain hidden for so long. Today's investigation wasn't about teaching us to fear hospitals. It was about teaching us that appearances alone are never evidence of character. Understanding behavior, following patterns, and asking difficult questions. That's how investigators uncover the truth. If you have another case you'd like me to investigate, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep your eyes on the evidence and your mind on the motive. Detective Cipher, signing off.